Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is September the 11th, 2024. It has been 3,880 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 203 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, 2 years and 200 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression, and 37 days since Ukraine counter-invaded Russia. Today's podcast covers the events that happened from Tuesday to Wednesday morning. You will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. There is a link in the podcast description, and there are map updates today. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south, and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission: the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. 1. The lack of a meaningful response by Ukraine's allies to open and unrestricted attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure by Russia has convinced Moscow this is an effective strategy with no political consequences. 2. Russia will maintain its attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, continuing Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 4 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. 3. Continued attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have caused critical damage, creating an environment where an accident at one or more of Ukraine's nuclear power plants is possible. 4. The unwillingness of the Biden administration to permit Ukraine to use provided weapons for strikes more than 40 kilometers from the 1991 state border with Russia has forced Ukraine to develop its own deep strike capabilities, proving that escalation threats from Moscow are hollow. 5. The policy of escalation management implemented by the NATO alliance and the United States, and to a small extent Germany, is a complete failure that only encourages Russian acts of aggression, including more frequent and deeper violations of NATO alliance airspace and acts of espionage in Europe and North America. 6. We maintain that the failed policies of the NATO alliance are increasing the probability of a significant international incident, nuclear proliferation, and an expansion of the Russia-Ukraine war into the European continent. 7. Despite Russia's localized counteroffensive, Moscow has no strategic reserve available, continues to suffer unsustainable losses, and has committed almost all of its available conventional forces in Ukraine. 8. We maintain the Kursk counter-invasion is strategically sound. 9. Autocrat Vladimir Putin's order to recapture the Kursk region of Russia by October the 1st is unrealistic and unlikely. 10. The Russian economy is much weaker than reported. 11. Persistent delays in the delivery of promised military hardware, munitions and funding continue to prevent the Ukrainian armed forces from reaching their full combat potential. 12. We maintain the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction instability paradox. Today, we start the podcast with the action report summary. Yesterday, Russia carried out 131 discrete assaults, and through September the 10th, the 7-day moving average for daily attacks dropped to 170. While this is the smallest number of assaults since August the 11th, a month to the day, we maintain that Russian forces are in a brief operational pause for consolidation, resupply and reconstitution. In the Kursk region, Ukraine controls 1,222.5 square kilometers, with another 303 in the grey zone, for a total area of 1,525.5 square kilometers. The bridge is 95 kilometers wide, with a depth of up to 33 kilometers. Ukraine controls 93 hamlets, villages, settlements, and tactically significant areas, such as the Gazprom gas compressor and metering station at Sudzha. Of those, 33 settlements are under full administrative control. The Glushkovsky salient, where 2,500 to 3,000 Russian troops are isolated, is 544 square kilometers. Let's go into the details of what happened on the battlefield. This would be a good time to open up the war map on a second device and find the city of Sumy, that's in the northeastern Ukraine. There is a link to the map in the podcast description. Ready? Here we go. We begin in the Kursk region of Russia, in the Glushkovsky area of operation, or AO. Satellite images showed that Russia had constructed a new pontoon bridge north of Glushkovo. The faint outline of a bridge that was built on September the 5th and another that was previously destroyed were visible, but there wasn't enough resolution to verify that either bridge was usable. Russian engineers have been partially submerging the pontoon bridges to hide them on satellite images and make them more resistant to attacks by cluster munitions. Ukrainian drone operators attacked a Russian logistics node and barracks in Kabylki. Russian and Ukrainian sources reported there was fighting in the area of Yelizavetovka and Troitskaya. We expanded the grey area along the 1991 border to Yelizavetovka based on a video that recorded light arms fire, but could not be geolocated. In the Korenevo AO, a Russian counteroffensive has created significant fog of war. An armored column advanced from Korenevo on the Korenevo-Snagost-Troitskaya highway, and during the final approach to Snagost, the assault was uncontested. Satellite images showed significant combat-related fires in the northern half of the settlement. There was a dramatic increase in the amount of artillery scarring on the Korenevo-Snagost-Troitskaya highway north of Snagost. The pattern was consistent with Ukrainian activity, showing a higher degree of accuracy. Some Russian and Ukrainian sources claimed that Ukrainian forces fell back as far as Obukhovka. We can't verify the claims, but NASA Fire Information for Resource Management Systems indicated there were fires in the settlement. Clouds partially obscured Obukhovka during today's Sentinel-2LA satellite pass. There was a new bomb crater from a VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, airstrike southwest of the settlement and fires burning in the center. At least one Russian T-80BV main battle tank was destroyed. The status of Snagost and the surrounding villages is unknown, with Russian forces claiming 8 Ukrainian soldiers were captured. Adding to the fog of war, the Russian Ministry of Defense, or Armored, reported fighting was still ongoing in the area of Krasnooktyabrsky. There were new artillery scars and fires west and north of Внезапное, adding credibility to the report by Russian mercenary ML blogger Rybar of fighting near the village. There were also new artillery scars west of the former Soviet-era village 10th October, which Armored claimed was captured. Armored also reported fighting in the area of Apanasovka. Rybar claimed there was fighting in Viktorovka, but that seems highly unlikely due to the geography and geospatial intelligence. By morning, Russian sources were claiming between 2 and 10 villages and settlements were captured. We adjusted the map to show the Russian advance from Korenevo, reduced the grey area along the Korenevo-Snagost-Troitskaya highway, and coded Snagost as contested. North of Korenevo, in Tolpina, a Russian Strela-10 air defense system hidden in a cattle barn was destroyed. Unlike yesterday's claim by Rybar of a similar attack in Snagost, the video from the first-person view one-way drone showed that Russian forces were using the working farm as an air defense node, in violation of international humanitarian law. Between Durovka and Zhuravli, a Russian soldier was attacked by a drone-delivered IED. Based on the visual confirmation of the Russian presence, the map was adjusted to show a Russian advance in the direction of Durovka. A Russian BTR-82 armored personnel carrier ran over a mine and was destroyed on the Kremyanaya-Sheptuchovka road near Kalinov. Russian sources reported fighting restarted in the area of Kremyanaya. In the grey area north of Zhuravli, new artillery scars indicated fighting was ongoing in the area. In the Lgov operational direction, ROD, the VKS carried out new airstrikes southeast of Sheptuchovka. The video aligned well with the geospatial intelligence from Sentinel Hub, showing artillery scarring and the impact craters of earlier airstrikes. There were significant combat-related fires in the buildings in the southern part of the village, in the same area where Ukrainian forces have been advancing for the last 7 to 10 days. Near Shapashnikova and Semyonovka, there were signs of renewed fighting. The VKS carried out an airstrike in the northern part of Kamyshevka, where Rybar reported there was fighting. There were new artillery scars in the area of Naidionov, and Armad reported that Orlovka, Novaya Sorochina and Malaya Loknya were shelled. In the Sumy Oblast of Ukraine, an Iskander-M short-range ballistic missile hit a concentration of Ukrainian troops in Bezdrik that had gathered in the open. There was a significant number of casualties, but no official details were released about the September 4th attack. On September 8th, an Iskander-M SRBM struck the Three Bears Hotel near Radkivka. There was no information about casualties or if the hotel was in use. North of Velika Cherneshchina, a third Iskander-M struck a bridge that crosses the Psel River. Two explosive ordnance disposal engineers accidentally ran over a mine while working in the Sumy region. The driver was killed and the other is in hospital with serious blast injuries.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
It's time to talk about my home, Ukraine. Let's start in the Kharkiv Oblast in the Liptsevovchanskoye. Ukrainian forces made small gains in southern Hlyboke and along the bank of the reservoir, while in Vovchansk, Russian forces advanced one city block in the direction of the machine aggregate plant. In the Kupianskoye, fighting continued in the southern part of Sinkivka, northeast of Petropavlivka, west of Peshchane, and in the direction of Lozova from occupied Novoselivska. Russian forces were unable to make new advances. In the Luhansk Oblast, west of occupied Svatove, Russian forces tried to advance from occupied Sergiyevka and in the direction of Druzhelubivka. West of Kremenna, fighting continued in Makiyivka, and Russian forces tried to advance in the direction of Nevske, Novosadove, and Torske. Attacks continued in the direction of Grigorivka, south of the Siversky Donetsk River from the Serebryansky woods. Near occupied Dubrova, Ukrainian forces made small gains west and south of the village. Moving on to the Donbass, where we start in the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. Beginning in the Siverskoye, Russian forces maintained pressure on Ukrainian troops west of occupied Zolotarivka and tried to advance in the direction of Ivanodaryevka and Vyemka. Russian forces reached the center of Spirne and raised two flags in the rubble for a picture report. For more than 2 years, positional fighting within the remains of the village has continued. In the Kostiantynivka, Russian troops were observed northwest of Zaliznyanske, indicating there was a small advance parallel to the E40 highway. To the south, fighting continued along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal in Kalinivka, the western edge of the canal district of Chasiv Yar, and in the forested area west of Ivanivska. In the Donetsk-New York AO, Ukrainian forces are taking advantage of a reduction in operational tempo, stabilizing their defensive lines. Russian forces tried to bypass Ukrainian defenses in western Druzhba by attempting an advance in the direction of Dachne. Russian troops were unable to advance deeper into Toretsk, and an attempt to reach Nelipivka from Zalizne ended in failure. In southwestern Donetsk Oblast, Russian forces carried out 32 assaults in the Pokrovsk AO and made new gains. Ukrainian forces continued to hold the northern flank, repulsing attacks in the direction of Zelenopole, Vozdvizhenka, from Sverodonivka, Myrolyubivka, and Krasny Yar. Russian forces made no new gains in Hrodivka or Novogrodivka. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported fighting in the area of Ivanivka, which is between Russian-occupied Hrodivka and Novotoretsk. Russian forces advanced into Marinivka, while Ukrainian forces held their defensive positions in Mikhailivka. Russian sources continue to claim there is ongoing fighting within Selidove without evidence. In the Kurakhove AO, Russian forces carried out 29 attacks, and there was significant fog of war. Conflicting reports about the status of Lysivka and Ukrainsk continued. They range from Russian troops have not reached Ukrainsk, with Russian mercenary Melblogovo Gonzo stating that Russian forces, quote, continue to develop the offensive in the area of Ukrainsk and Hirnek. Other sources claim Lysivka is fully captured, Russia occupies half of Ukrainsk, and fighting has reached as far south as Hirnek. I know I keep telling you about geospatial analysis in the Kursk Oblast. What about Ukraine? Cloud cover and the timing of the Sentinel-2LA satellite passes have mostly blocked our geospatial intelligence. Additionally, the terrain is already heavily scarred from years of combat, making it extremely difficult to find new artillery and bomb craters in areas that already resemble the surface of the Moon. Northeast of Ukrainsk, Russian troops remain blocked at Dolinivka and Halytsinivka. We moved Nevelske back to contested because there has yet to be a Russian flag raising in the village. They can't pass up celebrating the capture of the ruins of a Ukrainian village. Ukrainian forces fully withdrew from Krasnohorivka, with Russian forces reaching the westernmost tip of the Panhandle. Russian assaults in western Georgiivka and central Kostantinivka were unsuccessful. In the Vuhledar AO, Russian forces reached the northwestern corner of Vodyane, capturing the village that has been critical to the defense of Vuhledar, where Russian forces have been stuck since October 2022. You're right, it wasn't a good day. On the Russian front, Russian officials reported that all airports were closed in the Smolensk region, and at least 3 drones of unknown source were shot down, with air raid sirens activated in the region. Smolensk is almost 3,000 kilometers from Ukraine. The governor of the Murmansk Oblast, Andrei Chibis, confirmed the attack, with Russian propagandists claiming the drones were launched from Norway. At Noyabrsk airfield in Siberia, 2 teenagers destroyed a Russian Mi-8T helicopter after agreeing to a payment of 5 million rubles from an unknown source on Telegram. The airframe was destroyed. Here is my Theaterwide update. United States President Joe Biden submitted a classified document to the Congressional Armed Services Committee and the so-called Gang of Eight, outlining how the United States defines victory for Ukraine and what is needed to achieve that victory. The report was 3 months late and fully classified, despite a congressional mandate for a publicly available summary. Hours later, the US Department of State confirmed that Iran had transferred up to 200 THAAD-360 short-range tactical ballistic missiles to Russia. The THAAD-360 is truck-based and has a range of up to 120 kilometers, depending on the warhead, which can weigh up to 150 kilograms. The missile uses the Russian GLONASS system for guidance. Multiple nations announced new sanctions or planned to announce sanctions against Iran. And then a lot happened. 32 members of Congress signed a letter to President Joe Biden requesting the immediate removal of all restrictions on US and NATO weapons used by the Ukrainian armed forces. The letter had broad bipartisan support and was signed by members of the House and Senate. Speaking to reporters, the House Foreign Affairs Committee chairman, Congressman Mike McCall, told U.S. news agency Politico that he believed that Ukraine would get approval for deep strikes on Russia during Secretary of State Antony Blinken's upcoming visit. McCall added that the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs of the United Kingdom, David Lammy, would join Blinken to make a joint announcement in Kyiv. Later in the day, Biden was asked by reporters if he would lift restrictions on Ukrainian missile strikes in Russia, replying, quote, "We're working that out right now." At the time of recording, Blinken and Lammy had already arrived in Kyiv, and a press conference was expected. While there is rampant speculation of what event or events caused the expected change in policy, it likely goes beyond one single factor. Ukraine is struggling on the battlefield, and deep strikes to disable Russian logistics would provide a significant benefit. Last week, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Rustem Umerov, delivered a classified list of potential military targets to Washington, and there is speculation that the Biden administration warned Moscow that restrictions would be lifted if Russia started using Iranian ballistic missiles. The trip comes the day after the classified report was sent to Congress, outlining how victory is defined and achieved, and dozens of lawmakers demanded the change in policy. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that Ukraine's allies have made the decision to allow deep strikes on Russia and that the details are being formalized. During the United States' first presidential debate in Philadelphia, former President and Republican candidate Donald Trump refused to answer the question if he would continue to support Ukraine, instead saying,
"I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being uselessly, people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers. I want to get the war settled. I know Zelensky very well, and I know Putin very well. I have a good relationship, and they respect your president, okay? They respect me. They don't respect Biden."
Trump went on to say that he had spoken to autocrat Vladimir Putin since leaving the White House about U.S. foreign policy and that 300,000 Russian soldiers had been killed.
Putin would be sitting in Moscow, and he wouldn't have lost 300,000 men and women.
Later, Trump repeated Russian propaganda, suggesting that Moscow could use nuclear weapons.
But eventually, he's got a thing that other people don't have. He's got nuclear weapons. They don't ever talk about that. He's got nuclear weapons. Nobody ever thinks about that. And eventually, maybe he'll use them, and maybe he hasn't been that threatening, but he does have that.
Vice President Harris countered Trump's claim that he could end the Russia-Ukraine war in 24 hours, saying he would, quote, "give it up," implying the Trump plan would be to turn Ukraine over to Moscow. One thing that was widely missed during the debate was Trump's veiled swipe at NATO, saying that Europe has been underpaying for 75 years and he would raise, quote, "billions" by charging them in the future. He never mentioned the NATO alliance, but the organization just had its 75th anniversary, and the former president has repeatedly floated the idea of charging NATO members to remain under America's so-called nuclear umbrella. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.